sun. To dream, believe in strength. Now I'm the only one. Only one.
Well, excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. Today I have the amazing Terra Luft, chapter president for the Infinite Monkeys, former conference committee chair for the League of Utah Writers, author, award-winning author, I should add, and fantastic all-around person. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Jared.
Yeah, it's not a problem. Super eager to have this conversation since you were conference committee chair under most of my entire term, which was amazing. So
yeah, it's all your fault that I was
it is,
chair.
and we'll talk a little bit more about why that's my fault. But when were you conference chair from?
I was appointed at the board meeting at the end of 2016. So I served for the conferences in 2017 through 2020. I just got replaced.
I'm going to be honest, it feels like a decade that we've been doing like a decade that we've been doing this.
And in some regards, it doesn't feel like it was 4 years.
True.
So
Absolutely true.
Yep.
Well, perfect. So before you were conference committee chair, you were already had a lot of responsibilities on your plate. You were chapter president already of the Infinite. No? Yes, you were. You were already, because I became... Yep.
Yeah.
I was president-elect. You were chapter president of the league. You were in school at the time. You work a full-time job. You have kids. You know, you have a husband. Like, you have all of these things already on your plate. So what was going through your mind when you said, yeah, let's do the conference committee chair?
Well, we kind of have to back up to the year before I was asked. So, as Johnny Worthen does, he gets me involved in a lot of things because he drags me along, which I love because I love to hang out with Johnny. And when Chris Todd Miller was the president, his last year as being president, we had this sort of epic scramble event happen where so Johnny had asked me if I wanted to help out, and one of my other friends, Callie, had said yes. And we're kind of a dynamic duo because we get a lot of stuff done together. And they had asked us to help, but the venue canceled on us. Well, we didn't cancel. We had to find another venue, like last minute, because at the time called Salt Lake FanX, or Salt Lake Comic Con, which is now FanX, had decided to change their dates, and it was now in direct conflict on the same weekend as our conference was scheduled. And so we had to find a space, a new place, and find people who could still accommodate that new date. So there was a lot of crazy time trying to get it all done. And it was the first time I'd ever done anything at that level. I've always been sort of project manager type of a person at work, and I'm good at that. So it sort of came natural to me. And at the end of all that, I remember you coming up to me and saying, "So, Tara, how would you like to do this all the time? And we'll not be so crazy because we can spread it out and keep doing things and reuse the event every year and kind of make it streamlined." And I said, "I'll never forget this, Jared, because I looked at you and I said, I'll do this on one condition." Do you remember this?
Yes, very clearly.
And I said, and you said, "What's that?" And I said, "I get to run the conference committee the way that I know it needs to run, or I won't do it." And you said, "I trust you implicitly. I've seen you work. Whatever you decide, I will go with. So yes, I will agree to that." And I said, "Okay, I'll do it." So because at the time I knew that I was going to be involved, and if I wasn't in charge and I couldn't run things, I would probably hate it anyway, because I would want to do it differently, and not getting to be in charge would drive me crazy. So I might as well just be in charge of it. Sort of how I roll.
which was amazing. And I, of course, I appreciate the sacrifice and you and your family have put in to allow for that to happen, because we did a lot of amazing things. I remember that so vividly because I couldn't think of how we were going to pull off Chris's conference in such a short window and make it successful. I knew that we were going to have a conference,
Right.
but what would people say about that conference? That was really the question.
And who was going to be there and
Mhm.
where was it going to be held?
Yes.
And yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah.
But we did it and it was amazing.
Yes. Well, that's what, and I think I remember, leading up to me asking you, we had talked about things that we wished we had known going into this. We kind of had a de facto, a breakdown of the conference. Now we do it formally every year, which I think is fantastic. But to go through what we could have done better and how, and we thought, well, if we'd known this, if we'd started at this point, if we'd done these things, life would be so much easier.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, holy cow, this is tailor made for Terra. This was, and you and I got along so well. I do have to add that in there. Like I got along with a lot of people in the league, and I put many in different positions throughout the league, either chapter presidents, board positions. But I want to say you and I got along the most. You and were the most like minded going into everything. I mean, I remember you were there. You said this. We had this discussion. So when you went home, where you're like, by the way, I'm doing this thing now. So what was that discussion like with your family?
Well, my husband is very supportive. And we have a really great relationship where I know what my limitations are. And as long as I know, and as long as he knows that I know that I can do something, that I'll make a way for it to happen. And we had just come off 6 crazy weeks. I mean, we planned an entire conference, multi-day conference in 6 weeks from the time that we decided where it was going to be held and got it all done. And it had been really stressful. And so I told him, I said, here's the thing, I'm going to help out with this anyway, because they need me. And now I get to be in charge and we'll make it streamlined and it won't be as hard. And I said, and when Jared's done, then I'll be done too. That was a lie. Turned
Little
out to be a lie, but we'll get to that.
little did she know, many things
Little
would
did he
change.
know. So he just was like, I don't know how you're going to do it, but okay, I trust you. So, and my kids were older. I mean, my daughter now is, my youngest is 11 and I have an adult daughter. So they just always knew, like I was always doing something. So this was just the new thing that mom was doing. So it was good.
It was good. Now I remember at that conference, last time we talked about the program fiasco and the FedEx Kinko. Um,
Yes.
we briefly mentioned how Miss United Nations had not shown up for her keynote. Chris Todd Miller actually got up there and gave a phenomenal impromptu talk. Like this, that was one of my most favorite moments from that conference, is when he got up and gave. And then during that, the key point was a quote from a book he was reading at the time, and the quote was, "Work looks like magic to those unwilling to do it." And I
Mm-hmm.
and that just gave me chills
Yep.
when he did that. And of course, I got to give my big speech. Now, here's what's funny. Now, I'd been working with this team, with Callie, with Tara, with Johnny, all leading up to this conference. And I was going to give the big ending speech, and I was going to announce something the league had never done or had considered up until this point. Like, I was going to do something very radical.
Mm-hmm.
And it was to make a free day, one of a multi-day conference. One day was going to be free to anybody who just would show up and sit in a chair.
Free Friday.
So yeah, free Friday. Now, like, you knew this when you said yes, and that's a logistical nightmare for anybody. Like, did that go into your consideration when you said yes, let's do this?
No, because I didn't know really anything what it was gonna look like. So I thought we can just figure it out. I'm sure it'll be fine. you know? So maybe I'm too cocky about we can just figure it out. I've never I should knock on wood. I've never been wrong about that. Like, I just, we'll figure it out is sort of like my motto. And I mean, I think I remember wondering how we really were going to pull that off. Um, but I just thought, well, we'll figure it out and they'll be fine. I thought that it was more radical that we were going to install an actual chair that persisted even beyond the president every year. That was going to be the radical nature of it. And I don't know that I realized that the Free Friday was as radical as what you thought it was going to be. So maybe it was my ignorance and my naivety that that sort of had me going, yeah, we'll just make it work.
Well, I'm glad that didn't deter you. I'm glad.
Me
Now I
too.
remember when we first pulled together our first conference committee team, which was going to be for the spring conference, and I think our first conference committee team was like a ridiculous size. Like we had a lot of people.
I think there were like close to 30 people, I want to say,
Yeah, I
on that.
think so. That's what I was going to say. Like 30
Yeah.
people at the meeting.
And I would say that overall we had to learn. So I was listening to Amanda Lizader's second interview where she talked about being the president and how she thought it was great that we had thought of this and put it into place after she had been the president because it was so much, and you and I have talked about this too. It is so much to like figure out the first year, and then you don't really know what you're doing. And once you figure out what you're doing, you're no longer the president, right?
Mm.
And so it's sort of, we did that the first year. We were learning. um and there were so many things that we did that year. Like, we had summer workshops that year. Do you remember that?
Yep. Oh yeah.
So those have morphed into becoming part of the actual conference because it was too much to try and figure out how to do that in the summer, plus pull off a really great conference in August or even September. And we spent the first year really figuring out what we could do, how we could do it, where we should do it for the best bang for our bucks, and also how to organize the committee, because that's as key to it, I think, as anything else that we did. You have to have the right people with the right skill set. And when I told you that I wanted to do it my way, that was really the key of what I meant. Is it can't just be a warm body. Like, this kind of work at that level, there's lots of people who want to help, but there's not a lot of people who have the proper skill set for the individual pieces to pull off a conference of the size that we were wanting to do and that we were aspiring to hold. And so I knew that that was what we were going to have to find, is how do we hone this, subcommittees that just ran themselves. And it took us the first couple of years to really dial that in. We had people coming and going, and we had too many people, and then we didn't have enough people, and not the right people. And I feel like now 2020 was such a crazy year with the pandemic, but overall the conference kind of was, I won't want to say it ran itself, but we were so in tune with each other on the conference committee that all we really had to do was roll with the pandemic punches, not necessarily figure out how to do a conference, because that was sort of old news for most of us because we'd been working together for 2 or 3 years at least. So it was a good run, and I feel like I left it better for the next person who's going to make it even better than me. Just
Yes.
rocket.
Yeah, Jez is amazing. I'm really excited to see what the conferences look forward. Now, this is going to be interesting because you and I are still participating on a level at the conference committee, but we're not nearly what we were doing before. And
Hmm.
so it's going to be very interesting to see how things progress. One of the things I loved was that the very first year we did spring at Salt Lake Community College, which was really fun, which was really great. I really enjoyed that spring conference. That
It's
at
a
that
great venue too.
Yeah, the venue and the Salt Lake Community College was incredibly generous on the space that they would give us, and even that first year they allowed us to use it for free, which was, I mean, it was mind boggling. And we had the board meeting the first year. What was that?
Wasn't it free because they gave us a grant or something? I feel
Yes.
I feel like it was not just
Yeah, it
here
wasn't
you
just
go
free.
for free,
Yeah, yeah.
but
No, they
we benefited from it.
exactly. Yes, they needed to. They had grants to apply to community service and community projects, and in return, we had to provide more than just a conference, in which we allowed Salt Lake Community College students to attend for free if they
Hmm.
would just come to the conference, which was really cool. And we
Yep.
had several of their instructors teach as well at both the
Hmm.
spring and the fall conference that year, which was
Hmm.
really cool. But yeah, it was interesting because that spring conference was the first time we put the committee through the first paces,
Hmm.
and it was really cool to see that to be very successful. That turned out to be well done, which I
Yes.
was excited about. So that led us right into fall conference, and this was Salt Lake Community College. We ended up going back to the same venue we had held spring conference,
Hmm.
because we were very familiar with the space. But what I loved was how we got the keynote speaker for that conference. Do you remember that? Could you share that story?
That's an interesting story. So I had met Kevin J. Anderson, who's an amazing guy. We had probably, I think it was in 2016, perhaps, um, maybe 2015, but prior to the 2017 conference, I had gone to a World Horror Convention because at the time I was part of the Utah Horror Writers Association, and um, the World Horror was in Utah. And so I happened to be there, and I'm not somebody who's like star studded, like starstruck. You're just a person when I meet you, okay? And I remember I was in we were at the Marriott in Provo for World Horror, and I walked into an elevator with, I'm pretty sure Callie was with me because she's always with me, and Kevin J. Anderson was in the elevator, and we started talking because I talk to everyone because it's just who I am. I'm that one person who's always extroverted, and I talk to everyone. So all the introverts like stand behind me and let me talk because then they don't have to. And I remember putting my foot in my mouth and asking him, "So who are you, and why should I know you?" It was Anderson, and he was gracious because he is. And we ended up, we laughed about it when he told me, and I was like, "Oh, okay, so I should know you." And I kind of laughed it off and hoped that I would never see him again, maybe because I felt like I was the schmuck, right? And then I ended up, I think the next day we were in a party because at World Horror they have like every night they have certain people host the suite parties, and we ended up in a party room with Kevin J. Anderson, and we ended up drinking that night because there's very few people in Utah, especially in the Salt Lake or in the Provo area, that are drinking usually because of the predominant religion. And he and I got drunk together and talked about things and decided to be friends in a manner of speaking. And then when we were talking about it later and we were trying to figure out what we were going to do for keynotes, we were throwing around, well, what big names could we get and who can we bring out? And I said, well, I've met Kevin J. Anderson. I could reach out to him, and we have met. And I was, I never thought that one evening at a place where, Kevin J. Anderson goes to all sorts of conferences and conventions, much larger than World Horror in Salt Lake City. And I reached out to him via email and said, "Do you remember me?" And he said, "How could I forget you?" And we met in that hotel elevator. And so I told him what we were interested in, and he said I would love to come. And he was our keynote at the 2017 conference. So, and I thought, okay, that's the first hurdle because one of the scariest parts of being the conference chair is figuring out who you're going to get to come and be the name, and it has to be somebody different that no one else has seen before, and it's not the same every year, so that people will still want to come and see them. And that was one of the scary things because I don't really know people Like, I'm just sort of like a person who's a normal person, and I don't go to a ton of conventions outside of Utah. And, I was kind of a newish writer at the time. So I just had a skill set. I didn't know people. I wasn't connected like some other people are. And so that was sort of my, oh, okay, that's the first one. Now I got this kind of thing. So that was funny. Those were good times. I forgot about that.
Well, one of the things that we learned early was that professional authors that keynote events, they book out like 18 months to 2 years in advance. And the way that we'd been running conferences, typically the president knew about a year in advance.
Yep.
Sometimes they would wait till after the winter. So typically it would be like 6 months to get a keynote. And what I discovered later on is that the league had some phenomenal authors, and it was a little bit of a different time back when we had Mary Higgins Clark, when Louis L'Amour was a keynote, like when these amazing authors were at the same time, they weren't getting paid like $50,000 to go do an event. And
Yeah.
that's the price tag for many of the authors that people think of. If you're a household name, typically it costs minimum $50,000, and that's for like 1 hour at a conference. That's not doing anything else at a conference.
Yep. Which is hard because a lot of people don't understand that. It's like, well, why aren't we getting the big names? And it's like, how are we going to pay for those big names? We're a nonprofit, so that was always really difficult.
Well, and people would just throw out that we'll just ask, and we did, and people don't know that we've asked everybody. I remember I thought, well, might as well take a shot in the dark, dear Mr.
What can
Stephen
they say?
King.
They
right.
can just know, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
Right. So many of the big authors, and even so many of the medium grade authors that like are phenomenal authors that I thought, okay, maybe we have a chance at getting these people. They're like, no, if you're not going to pay me this much, unfortunately. And of course, we're not going to throw names out there like who turned us down or anything like that.
No.
But
No.
Because they have their professions, they've got their families and houses to feed. A lot of people don't know. When I was talking with Kevin J. Anderson, that was one eye-opening piece. He was going to go be a professor. He was working on that. And one of the reasons why, and I never thought of this before, when you're a professional author, who's your health insurance through? Like, what does that cost? If you have a medical issue, that's a game changer. Like, that had never crossed my mind. And he's like, oh yeah, you gotta figure something out. You gotta pay.
You gotta have something.
Right, and the book revenues aren't always enough to cover some of those costs. So like, they're people too with real world problems, as it turns out. But it was cool. That was the first time I met J.H. Moncrief, and she was amazing to get her to come down.
That was awesome. That was our second year, wasn't it? No, you're right.
She came to the same one. Yeah, as
did
Kevin.
Come to fall. Actually, it was funny. So you want to know how I got JH to come?
How?
That's a story I don't know if you know, Jared.
I don't know.
Johnny and I and Callie went on a recruiting trip because we were all interested, because we were all horror writers, right? Same kind of overlap where we were Horror Writers Association members. I'm pretty sure Johnny still is. And we went to the Horror Writers StokerCon that year. And it was, I believe, early enough on. I think it was like right after spring. So we did our spring conference in, I think, April. And then I think it was in May that the StokerCon was. And I went solely Johnny was presenting, right? He was a faculty at StokerCon. And I went solely to recruit people who we could potentially find who were great teachers, who were potentially not really well known, but would still contribute really to our conferences. And I overheard, at the time I didn't know who it was that she was talking to, but she was talking to another pretty well-known author at breakfast. And I was eavesdropping over coffee. And listening to them talk about how she had this great new book out and talking about her author and blah blah, and she was on the staff. So I basically stalked her because I overheard her talking to a friend. They were friends over coffee, and I followed her around to see how well she presented. And she's a phenomenal teacher. We've had her for, I think, 3 years that she's come out. And I approached her and we went on a ghost hunt and we were talking, and I said, I'd love to have you come out and be a guest at our conference. And she's like, no one's ever asked me that. And she's like, I would be honored. And so that's how we ended up with JH. And I've never been apologetic about overhearing what she was talking about at breakfast. I don't know if she knows that even. So it'll be funny if she sees this.
Well, I'm hoping, because it's my plan to interview maybe some guests from some of our conferences to talk about their experiences. And JH is definitely on my list of people to talk to. I loved getting to meet her. She's somebody I wouldn't have gotten a chance to meet if you guys hadn't managed to get her to come to the conference. That was a big deal, which was really cool. Now, at that conference, we had, we had, so Johnny was the president-elect in that window.
Yeah.
And that was the conference that changed everything. That's when they changed the rules and they asked me to be president for a second year in a row. Was that the conference? Yeah, that was because I had my fall conference.
Yep.
And I was going to have another fall conference.
Yep.
Which wasn't anticipated when we first started our agreement. Our trek together was that this was going to be a 3-year trip and it was going to be magical.
And now it's a 4-year trip.
So we go into the next year. We have another tremendous spring conference, which I loved. We refined it a little bit more. It was a little bit more well done. I was excited about that spring conference. We did some great things. I remember at that spring conference, Johnny actually got up at the lunch and gave this fantastic speech about how we're all in the community together and we should love each other. And Johnny was going through some hard times in that window. But it was great to see that fantastic speech come out at that moment to help unite the league, keep everybody together and moving forward. But then, so what we had up our sleeves, we had gone from a free day at a conference held at Salt Lake Community College, which again, amazing hosts, and we were transitioning to the Marriott. Now, the Marriott, when I say that to people in Utah, they automatically assume the Provo Marriott, where like 90% of the writing conferences happen in Utah.
Everybody's Provo at the Marriott.
But we were doing something outside the box, and that's partially because we were looking to, as a nonprofit, get grants from Salt Lake County. And if you want a grant from Salt Lake County, you got to have conferences in Salt Lake County, as it turns out.
Yep.
And we'd picked the Marriott up at the University of Utah. And this was a very ambitious conference for us. We had built up a little bit of a war chest, and we wanted to really show off what the league could do now that we had some legs to it. And as a conference committee chair, like, this was dramatically different from the Salt Lake community to this conference. Let's talk a little bit about that, like when we started that planning.
So it was interesting because first we didn't know it was going to be at that Marriott, because we had to go and find venues that would hold us and that we could afford, which is a hard combination, right? So we threw out a whole bunch of places where we had all collectively been to smaller conferences, bigger conferences. And I have a friend that I recruited onto the conference committee who isn't a writer, but she is a travel agent. So I knew that I needed someone who could do all that for us. And I employed her and I said, look, I have no idea how to find venues like this. Is this something you could help us with? She's like, absolutely, this is easy. So she went out and looked for a whole bunch of places and a whole host of requirements. And we just basically told her, this is how many people that we want. This is what kind of food sort of options, because when we were at the community college for 2017, that was the hardest thing that we had to deal with, was how do we feed people and deal with banquet catering staff, because that was something separate that we couldn't just do at the venue where we were at the community college. And so we had to figure out how to have banquet staff, and how do we plan meals, and how do you get contracts in place. We were also changing the name of the conference. I mean, 2018 was transformational because it became no longer the League of Utah Writers Fall Conference. It became the Quills Conference. And we were entering into multiple year contracts with the Marriott, because once we found out that this was the only place that could hold us, feed us, and that we could actually afford, we were like, so how do we get even better deals? And they're like, well, if you want to commit to more than 1 year, then we will lock in a rate. And you're not required, but if you say, give us and they were trying to win us over to have us be choosing them permanently, right? So it was sort of a give and take. We were hoping that they would be everything that we wanted, and they were hoping that we would be a standard every year fare for them. And I remember them saying, if you'll give us a shot, we will discount it. And then if we can do everything that you need, then we will only increase by like 5% or something for the next year. So basically they gave us 5% off if we would consider doing a second year without actually committing to a second year. And it was kind of rough the first year because I didn't know what to expect. They had a whole lot of things that we had to work out as far as how we would put people in what rooms, and how many rooms would we have going at the same time, and where would we put a bookstore, and how would we have vendors, and it was how are we going to feed people, and how will we charge people for food and not lose our shirts with the food, and how will the food not be terrible banquet food, which is always what everyone expects, right? And it was ambitious, but I feel like we really surprised, maybe not ourselves as much, but certainly everyone else, because that year was amazing. I think we had like 300 people that were there. It kind of blew us all away. Plus we had some really great talent that was there that year too.
Yes, that's the year we brought in Tim Dorsey.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, to be honest, it was funny because that's one of Johnny Worthen's heroes, Tim Dorsey. And I remember he had been saying, hey, I would love to get Tim Dorsey. And it was kind of actually a concession because he was going to have to serve an extra year. And it was like hey, thank you. I'm going to let you do this thing. And he geeked out over it. And he was like, yes, he was very content for that.
Well, we also had Maria Schneider, right?
Yes.
That's who we also had that year.
Yeah, Maria Schneider, which, both of them were fantastic and really neat. Mm-hmm. One of the hardest things that we had to deal with during this time, and a lot of people don't know this, so we work really hard to make sure the conference is priced right, make sure that it's affordable to people, and make sure we don't lose a ton of money. Well, at the same time, we had a treasurer on the board who was giving us not great information. And so we were acting on incorrect information, which led to some faulty moves. And I definitely take responsibility for that. I should have seen that coming as president at the time, what was happening. But I made some interesting calls that we hadn't done before. Like, there were swag bags. There were these amazing bottles that you could get, and you got a notebook with a pen in it. We had some neat things that the conference just hadn't done before. And these weren't stretch things, according to the numbers we had. Now, lessons learned. To make
How many bottles did we end up at?
We had some extra bottles. We had a few. We still sell them at conferences. So but when it came to the overall finances, we learned some pieces because we were given incorrect information. We thought we were doing it right, and it's a lesson learned in making sure the right people are in the right spots. And even when you didn't know, like I didn't know for sure that we had not the right person in the right spot. It just one person had thrown off everything in a certain aspect. Now, thankfully, it didn't affect the conference itself. Thankfully, it didn't bankrupt the league. Thankfully, we're positive and solvent, and we're able to continue to have conferences moving forward. But what we did learn, and I took a little bit of a beating because it's definitely my fault for saying yes to a lot of things that had I known the true numbers, I would have said no to. But it also created an unbelievable experience for people. Like you were saying, it gave everybody a real sample of what the league could do. Now, what I loved was we learned these lessons. We wanted to be more budget conscious. Now, and that was my last year as president. And of course, Terra thought this was going to be, I'm going to be the conference committee chair while Jared's around. And now Johnny was taking over, and Johnny's like, "Hey, Terra, you're not going anywhere, right?"
Like Johnny does. Johnny asks Terra as many things as Jared does and says, "But I need you. What do you mean you're done? You won't be, I got you, right?" And I was like, how can I say no to Johnny when I didn't say no to Jared? And honestly, like, because 2018 had been so amazing, but we also had some of those budget challenges where I wanted to find out if we could still do it, even if we had to make adjustments, right? So I was also not really ready to say no and hand it over to someone else because it wasn't a perfect model yet. And I believe even at that point, we were still sort of, at that point, I think was when we started looking at a conference app with Rachel Bush, who's the marketing chair. Because she's a romance writer and she'd been to RWA, and she was like, you guys, if we want to be on this level that we want, we cannot have a printed program that's outdated the minute that it goes to press because we're making changes up until the day before, because that's how it always is. Things happen. One year, one of our guests, their parent died, and we, struggled to decide how things were going to change. And we have, people get sick, and there's always things that are going to change. And having a printed program that costs so much money to have a printed program that looks professional, and then you have to still print out a corrected copy of the grid schedule because some things might have changed, So Rachel was like, we have to have an app. And she was incessant about it. And she was tenacious about finding us a great deal on one. And that also propelled us because then in 2019, we had a conference app, which in hindsight was the only reason why we got to still do it a conference in 2020. Because if we didn't have an app to host it in, it wouldn't have happened with this pandemic.
You're spot on. That was such an amazing timing for what Rachel brought forward, and you and Johnny had elected to move into place for 2019.
Well, and because we had done enough between spring and fall with quills, we were able to sort of spread out the money because we'd also gotten grants because we were in Salt Lake. And so we had the ZAP grant and a whole bunch of other stuff. And so because we had done all those improvements, we had the cash to be able to pay the conference app contract and just build it in to the cost of the conference going forward, because it sort of pays for itself when you have a world-class level of conference app to go along with your conference. So when Johnny was like, well, of course you have to help me and keep doing this, I was like, you're right, I do, because I can't stop now, because imagine what we could do. Because as I had said, every year we kind of got better at it. And I didn't feel like I had done as much as I could to say, yes, I've done all I can, right? I feel like after 2020, I did everything that I could. And now it's time for the younger generation crowd to come in and improve on what I put in place, and I can't wait to be still part of it because I'm still on the conference committee. I'm just not in charge, which is so nice.
It's especially nice knowing that we know that there are highly competent, trained people in these positions. It's
Mhm.
not people coming on for the first time out of the blue saying, "Oh yes, I can do this thing," and then finding
Mhm.
out the hard way that they can't do it, or that somebody else, should have been assigned this who could do it better.
Mhm.
You're spot on. I think that's one of the great testaments to having a conference committee, because had it been, let's just say we hadn't had the conference committee model and I had somehow managed to make these conferences happen as president, I'm pretty sure I would have been in shambles. I would have looked, you know, 10, 15 years older than I do now. I
That's
would
a
look
great
so tired. Yeah. Um, Even if I had managed to and had some budget struggles and things, the next president, I think, would have panicked and overreacted and said, okay, then we've got to do
one. Hmm.
like less than nothing. We got to almost not hold a conference
Yeah.
instead of already having plans and understanding everything in place. Oh, if we just make these minor corrections, guess what? Next year's conference is more budget friendly. Guess what?
Hmm.
And things make more sense this way. And we deploy these pieces and it's going to work out better. And it did. It worked out better in 2019. It was a testament of everything we had learned. And
Hmm.
then 2020, again, if a brand new president had to come in on 2020 with no app and no committee, I cannot even imagine what that looks like
Hmm.
for a conference. And there were many conferences that happened that year, this year, that year, 2020. I
Like
already
it's
want to, yeah, I want to remove myself from it already. But there's a lot of conferences that happened this year that had to do it virtually, and many that know that they're going to have theirs virtually at the beginning of next year, and they're
hmm
all still trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure out. Some are trying to figure out the way we did it because they really like the way we did it. People are
hmm
Groups are envious. They're like, "How did you accomplish this thing?" I'm like, "It's not a one person, just one app solution. It's, by the way, we had a whole team of people doing amazing things the entire time. Not that another conference can't have that,
hmm
but it's just not a simple answer. It's not, oh,
Yeah.
just clone Terra. I have said this many times that I would do that at some point.
Hmm.
But
Well, and I thought you would have to because I didn't think we would find anyone that I could hand it over to that had my skill set. So, yeah. What I feel like is interesting is that um, when we were going into 2020 and we were looking at it's 85 years and we're in a pandemic and what are we going to do? Not only did we keep it going, but we pulled off an anthology that we gave away for free that was amazing. That we didn't have to do that. We could have just said, "Oh, 2020 happened and we'll do that next year," kind of thing. And we still did it all because we had an amazing team. I don't think that we added anyone to the conference committee in 2020 except for my understudy because when I knew that I had committed to Jared and then thought I was going to be done and then okay, I will extend for you, Johnny. I was up front, and the very first meeting that we had when John was the president elect, I took him aside and I said, just so you know, I'm done when you're president. So you're going to need to find someone to take over for me and I'll help you. But even if I can't find someone, it's going to be up to you to find someone. And I am going to step down. And I kept thinking, as 2019 rolled through and we kept asking who else might want to step up and we couldn't find anyone, and then 2019 is over and it's 2020 and now there's a pandemic, and I was really concerned that I wasn't going to be able to step down. And I had friends, and I will be honest, my family, who was saying, you said this is happening. Right? First of all, you said it was only going to be 2 years. Now it's been 4. You cannot do another year. Like, we will kill you. And, you know, I did finish my undergrad and now I'm in a master's program. And so, like, my life, and I got a promotion at work. So now I'm a manager. And, like, everything in life has, like, just ramped up. Right. And I knew I had to step down no matter what. And it killed me worrying that I was going to leave everyone in a lurch without me. And then we found Jez, and it was so refreshing. She came in right after spring, and kind of at spring, we talked her into maybe she would consider doing it. And then her and I had a really great conversation about like what it really takes and what, I had already put in place for her and how we could transition it. And then she actually got to be my understudy for Quills for 2020 and was with us the whole way and was partly in charge. All I will tell you, there were a lot of things that happened at 2020 I couldn't have pulled off myself. It only happened because Jez was part of the team, and it was a great segue for her to step up while I stepped back, and it was seamless because of that. And really, I feel like that is how you designed it to be, and then we just put it in place. And as long as we as a league continue that, I feel like we're strong for the next 10 years maybe.
Yeah, I was going to say that the conferences, before I became a member of the league, and I'm going to be very open with this. I have some good friends who will say stuff. Before I joined the league, I'd heard about writing conferences, and to be honest, I was a naysayer. I was like, why would you go to writing conference when YouTube has so much amazing content? Which YouTube does has some amazing content, right? Yeah. I didn't understand because I hadn't experienced it for myself. Mm-hmm. And then when I became president-elect of the league and toured all the chapters, I asked everybody, what could we do better? What are we not doing well? What do you wish we could do right now? And that was one of the things that had come out of the wish list was many hadn't ever attended a conference like myself. The first conference I attended was the conference where I became president-elect of the league. So that was kind of nuts. And so I found out that everybody was like me. There were so many who had not attended a conference. And the number one reason at that time was it was too expensive. It was too expensive, or it was way out of the way. And this was for every chapter had similar stories. Mm-hmm. And so that's why my first goal was to have a conference where we had a free Friday. I thought everybody should have the opportunity to see what a conference looks like. First of all, I had no idea what the logistics looked like, putting that, making that kind of commitment to the league and people. And now, having gone through this many years of conferences, I can only say it's such a unique experience. People think to themselves, well, I joined the league or I joined a writing group because I want to improve my writing, which absolutely you need to do. Writing with more than just your friends, I learned that the hard way. My first book is terrible because I shared it with friends and my family, and everybody said it was amazing, but none of them were writers. So they all said it was fantastic. And I put it out there, and somehow that hot mess got published and did nothing. Like, it sold 5 copies. I learned the hard way, so brutally hard. When you have a group and community, that's great. That's the first step. But the conference is the access to the next level of things. And that's what we really wanted to take. We didn't want a beginning level conference. We didn't want where you could just go, hey, how do you start writing a story? What does an outline look like? We didn't want to start with the 101, but we had a conference for that already. We felt like this. Spring conference was this is how you start moving into the next level. And next level is you're ready to go pro, right? You're ready to take a shot at the bigs and make sure that your work is at that quality level. And I didn't know, thankfully, you guys had been to conferences, many conference experiences, to say, okay, these classes are not worthy of a conference that people are going to pay this much money to attend. We got to make some really tough decisions with people that had long taught classes, but their class content was spring content. Their book writing was pro level writing, and we were like, hey, give us something more. And that we got to challenge people. What I loved was seeing how many people after the conferences connected with their agents or editors, or elevated themselves, learned something to make their publishing, self-publishing career more successful. You know, the conferences that you and I have put on together have been really special to myself. I can't tell you how grateful. I don't think I could have come even close without you in that role. And I don't think Johnny in the same level. And you might know this. Johnny was actually my first conference committee chair.
I do. That's why I was there to help.
Yes. The spring conference was the first conference, and when he ran the entire, like, he walked the entire floor so much he gave himself blisters, so much, but at the end of the day he could not physically walk. I'm like, there's got to be a better way to do this. There's got to.
Yep, there is. Luckily.
And
well, and I want to riff off what you were just saying, because I feel like that is one of the best things that we did, is because not only did we have a vision for the difference between the one-day conference in the spring and then also the multiple day where people would fly in and actually, you know, travel or drive from far reaching within the state, because we wanted to make it so where you didn't just get the exact same content, right? And in order to pay for the guests that you have to, and like, because you have to bring people in, and if you want to have agents there to attract some of the bigger names, people who are going to come, you have to have a little bit of money, and it has to be able to pay itself. Now, we don't make a profit. We have to pay like pay for itself, right? And sometimes we don't know that until right before the conference, and every day it's like, how many tickets did we sell today? How many tickets did we sell today? But we got it to the level that no matter who you are, no matter what part of your career path and your writing goal, you know, the path we're all on, there's something for everyone at Quills. And if you take a chance, it doesn't matter if you're ready for the big leagues. You're still going to elevate your writing. Like we did so much to make sure that there was something for everyone. Every year we've done that. That has been a huge effort that we put in to build the program. And like you said, we've had to say, we would love to have you as a presenter, but not at Quills, because we need to have content that people will pay for. I remember the board meeting right after the first spring. It was brutal, because chapter presidents are honest people when they're in a room with each other, and the chapter presidents make up the board. And I remember someone saying, I don't know why I would tell my people to spend the kind of money that you're asking to go to this conference. You have to tell us why it's going to be so expensive, because it was going to be expensive, more expensive than it had ever been, especially so. And this was when we were going to the Marriott, because we were not at a small, you know, not hotel venue like the community college. And we had to answer to the board, you know, and it was a fair question. And, you know, this year we had people from all over the world virtually at Quills 2020. Thank you, pandemic, right? Because we also had 10, I think it was 10 agents and editors. We can't afford to fly 10 agents and editors in, but 2020 was so amazing, and we captured the spirit of Quills, even though we were in their virtual space, to where every one of those agents told us that they would want to come back. And now we have to pick and choose which ones have a more appeal to more people that make it worthwhile if we can actually have people in person, which is a horrible, like, amazing place to be as a conference chair. Usually you feel like you're desperately beating down the doors of people asking if they would maybe want to come to Utah, and this time for 2021 they have their pick of who will be the best draw. I mean, Tor wants to come back to our conference because they found a lot of great writers here. So I feel like the future is just amazing what we can do from here. So super fun.
Yeah, I'm excited about what we built together, what we've accomplished, what it's going to look like into the future. I think we've given it a great place to go. And there were so many people who put in countless hours, killed themselves alongside us to make sure that the conferences did what they needed to do. There were, generous donations by groups. I have to mention, like, when I worked for my last job, Valcom, they printed these gorgeous banners for us that we would hang up around the conference that would have the schedule. And there's a picture of me at the community college actually holding one of these schedules up so we could tape it up there.
I remember that. I think the caption was Jared supporting the conference, literally.
Literally, yep. There were so many pieces into it, but so many lessons we had learned so that we could have them learned for everybody moving forward. So nobody had to relearn the lesson again, which I think is awesome. Because people don't know. I can't tell you how many people would come up to me after we did the community college one. I had a ton of groups come up to me and say, how did you do this? Right? After we did 2018, people were like, how did you do this? Like, what did you... And I used to joke with them. I did joke with them at that time and just said, you gotta kidnap Terra. You have to get her to agree. No, I did joke with that sometimes. But, I'd tell groups, I'm like, because they would think, okay, if the league could do this, it's got to not be that difficult. And it's funny that they kind of had that mindset because the league for a while was kind of the underdog in the community, in the writing community, even though we're 85 years old, older than any other writing group in Utah.
Yep.
So these other groups would say, how do you accomplish these things? And then the very first question I was asked, because I would go down the list that we had learned, where's your venue at? Who's your headliner? What's your ticket price goal? What's your attendance goal? And like those 4 questions are like the very first questions you ask before you even consider announcing that you're going to have a conference. That's what you know first. And I can't tell you how many organizations, as soon as they started doing the research that we had gone through the effort of doing, hey, guess what? You can get the Davis Conference Center. And guess what? You can get it for about $4,000 before food. Roughly $12,000 of food. By the way, they want you to fill about $5,000 in hotel rooms. That adds up super quick. Oh, by the way, they want to have deposits ahead of time. So you got to sell tickets and you have to... Yep. And that was like Davis. If you went anywhere else, in the whole state, there's wonderful conference facilities. But then they add different logistical challenges. What I do love, during your time, we were fortunate that we got to see a couple of different unique things happen. We saw a summer conference happen pretty independent of us up north in Logan. The symposium, which, well done up there. I kind of wish that they would continue it, but I know how stressful it is. Because they weren't leaning on the conference committee for that. Really, it was the chapter pulling it off themselves. And then there was St. George putting on their own conference, which they wanted to do the same thing, not really lean on the conference committee to put on their own thing. And both. So right now there's not a summer symposium. I wish we could continue that because I know that the people of Logan and northern Utah deserve a conference up there. And I know that the conference in St. George is struggling. We really want to have those things come up again. but it takes the those magic, right? A lot of time, the right people, the right combination of things. Now, the great news is we've learned a lot of lessons, and we know that any president who's ambitious enough to start announcing conferences all over the state, and summer classes and free Fridays, you know, it can be figured out when you have the right people in place. And Terra is one of those people. I'm excited that Jez, who took over the conference committee, is one of those people. I think down the road in the history of the league that hopefully they'll see this as a big growing point the way that we see it. Now, or maybe what will happen is Jez and John and Brian will have these conferences that eclipse ours, and they'll go, how did they accomplish these things? And they, they won't necessarily remember ours quite the same that we do.
And I want to make sure that, like, we've been talking about me specifically. I did not do this by myself. I have a dream team that we compiled after 3 years, and I couldn't have done it without all of them, because every one of them did things that I don't know how to do or wouldn't have done as well. Because, you know, we've got people who do graphics. Like, we could never have done all the graphic stuff that we've done for programs in the past without Corinne. And Rachel on marketing, and how she just jumps in and either finds someone to do stuff or figures it out on her own because she can't rely on anyone else. Like, she's a lot like me and will just do whatever. And without Jana, who would just take care of all the food, I would have been lost. I don't know how to figure out what we can all eat, but Jana did, because that was her specialty, you know. And Alex on volunteers, and Joanne with vendors, and like all the people who make it to where it couldn't have happened with just me, right? I was the kingpin in the middle, like orchestrating and doing all the stuff and making sure that we were thinking about all the right stuff, but I wasn't alone in pulling it off. And I feel like most of them, I think every single person is continuing with Jez. And, you know, you and I stepped down into smaller positions because I'm still building the registration stuff because I was doing that anyway, right? Because I'm a techie, right? And that's the part that I don't want to give up, because I love doing that part. And so I'm still doing that, and you're still gonna help with marketing and promotional stuff, I think, right? Isn't that what you're doing?
Yep.
And, you know, everything except for the person who is named the chairperson is the same underlying it. And I feel like that also sets us up for some really great success and growth in the future. So I really hope that they continue that as well in the years to come.
Which I'm excited for. That sounded like to me to have a challenge where I have the conference committee core on a meeting interview together to talk about some of our favorite memories from conferences. I think that would be really fun. But we've definitely taken a minute. And
Yeah, we have.
and I'm excited because we do have one more interview with Terra for her different roles. The last one going to be talking more about her as a chapter president and some of the neat things that they do over there and why, which is great. I'm excited about. But you know, obviously, I mean, I've thanked you so many times. I can never thank you enough. But now I got it on recording, so the history, for the remainder of the history of the recording, people will hear that how I am incredibly grateful for everything you and the Dream Team have done and the support that we put everything together. It's really made a lot of things come to life that I wasn't sure, because I shoot big, right? Like, I aim really high for everything. And we were able to reach those and achieve those goals. Plus, what it's really relieved so much stress, and people don't know this, that because presidents were doing it themselves, it was burning presidents out. And these amazing volunteers in the league would come, and then they would spend their time, and they'd be so exhausted after running their conference that they were lucky to continue writing or even staying with the league. Some, I think, purposefully move out of the state. I think, you know, but by having the conference committee and the things we put together, it's easier for the board to see what we do. It's easier for the league to know that they're going to get the kind of content that they're looking for, and it makes it so much easier for us to find, new leadership willing to take on being president of the league, which is its own dynamic challenge. But the stress that they're working with an amazing team is so light compared to when I was going into it. And I put on my first spring conference. Really, I had Johnny, but it was really, that spring was something else. I learned a lot myself. And thank you again. And okay, so we're going to be back. We're going to do one more interview. I'm excited for that. So everybody can stay tuned for that. Of course, we're going to do transcripts and recordings for the league. And I think now there's going to be a podcast. So this is going to be on there. So I'm excited for that piece on there as well.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, perfect. Thank you so much again for joining us.
Anytime, Jared. Thanks for having me.